The armory exploded in a storm of fire and noise. Daniel's team hid fast and hard, destroying weapon racks and ammunition stores. Alarms screamed throughout the palace. Within minutes, dozens of Realox's guards were rushing toward the chaos. The plan was working. Daniel fired 3 shots at an approaching squad, forcing them to take cover. 6 and the other loyalist guards held the corridor beside him. They fought bravely, these Zorani who had chosen to follow a human into battle. Fall back, Daniel shouted. Keep them chasing us. They retreated through the palace, leading Reelix forces on a wild chase through corridors and chambers. Every minute they bought was another minute for Valif to reach the tower. Every enemy they drew away was one less enemy standing between the queen and her goal. But Realox was not a fool. After 20 minutes of pursuit, his voice crackled over the palace communication system. All units ignore the distraction. The queen has been freed. Converge on the central communication tower immediately. Daniel's heart sank. Their advantage was gone. Change of plans, he said to his team. We go to the tower now. They ran through the palace, no longer trying to hide or distract. Speed was all that mattered now. Daniel's lungs burned. His wounded shoulders screamed with every step, but he did not slow down. They reached the central atrium just as Vale's group arrived from the other direction. The queen had made it to the tower's base, but Realox's forces had already surrounded the area. Dozens of enemy guards blocked every exit, and in the center of the atrium stood Commander Realox himself. He was even more imposing than Daniel remembered. His armor was polished black and his eyes burned with cold fury. When he saw Valith, his lips curled into a cruel smile. My queen, he said mockingly. You should have stayed in your cell. It would have been a cleaner death. Vale stood tall and faced him without fear. You are a traitor, Reelix. People will never follow you. The people will do what they are told. Realox replied, once you are dead, there will be no one left to oppose me. He raised his hand to signal his guards. But before he could give the order, new voice rang out across the atrium. The people are already rising. Commander, it was Katie. She had climbed to a balcony overlooking the atrium, and she held a communication device in her hand. Behind her, holographic screens flickered to life, all around the chamber showing scenes from across the city. Citizens filled the streets. They carried signs and torches. They shouted Valith's name. The queen's message had gotten through. Someone in her group had reached a secondary transmitter and broadcast her words to the entire planet. Reelix's face twisted with rage. It changes nothing, he roared. Kill them all. The battle erupted. Daniel threw himself into the fight with everything he had. He fired until his pistol was empty, then grabbed a fallen guard's rifle and kept shooting. Celix fell beside him, wounded but alive. The loyalist guards fought desperately against overwhelming numbers, but they were losing. For every enemy they defeated, 2 more took his place. Reops's elite warriors pushed them back toward the center of the atrium. Then the sky outside lit up with fire through the great windows of the palace. Daniel saw them descending. Human dropships, their hulls glowing from atmospheric entry. The horizons. Marines were coming. Authorization received, Katie shouted from the balcony. Captain Cole is landing troops now. Reelix understood that his time was running out. With a roar of fury, he charged through the melee directly toward Queen Vale. His guards fell back. To let him pass, no one stood between him and the queen, no one except Daniel. Daniel stepped into Relix's path and raised his weapon, the Zorani commander. Knocked it aside with a single blow. The rifle went flying across the floor. Foolish human, Relix snarled, you think you can stand against me? Daniel did not answer with words, he answered with his fists. The fight was brutal and one-sided. Relix was faster, stronger, and better trained than any opponent Daniel had ever faced. He struck Daniel again and again, each blow landing with devastating force. Daniel's ribs cracked, his vision blurred, blood filled his mouth, but he did not fall. Every time Relix knocked him down, Daniel got back up. Every time the commander thought the fight was over, the human rose again. The watching Zorani, both loyalist and traitor, stared in disbelief. No one had ever seen such determination. No one had ever seen such refusal to surrender. Relix began to hesitate. For the first time, doubt flickered in his cold eyes. Why won't you die? He demanded. Daniel spat blood onto the floor and raised his fists. Because I made a promise, he said through broken teeth. And where I come from, we keep our promises. He lunged forward one final time. Relix swung at him, but Daniel was ready. He ducked under the blow and grabbed the commander's arm. Using the last of his strength, he twisted and threw Relix off balance. Before the alien could recover, Daniel drew his combat knife and pressed it against the commander's throat. The atrium fell. Silent, everyone stopped fighting. Daniel stood over the fallen commander, his body broken but his spirit undefeated. Relix guards lowered their weapons. Slowly, their leader had been beaten by a single human. The will to fight drained out of them like water from a cracked vessel. Queen Vale walked forward through the stillness. She looked at Relix with cold contempt. Commander Relix, she said, her voice carrying across the atrium, I strip you of your rank and your honor. You will answer for your crimes before the people you betrayed. Guards loyal to the queen stepped forward and took Relix into custody. The traitor said nothing. His eyes were empty. His coup had failed. The palace doors burst open, and human marines poured into the atrium, but the battle was already over. Katie rushed to Daniel's side as he finally collapsed. Medic, she screamed. I need a medic over here. Daniel looked up at the orange sky. Through the palace windows, the twin moons were fading in the morning light. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the people of the capital city cheering. He had done it. Against all odds, he had kept his promise. As medical personnel surrounded him, Daniel felt a cool hand touch his face. Queen Vale knelt beside him, tears glistening in her ancient eyes. You saved my world, she whispered. Daniel managed a weak smile. Just doing my job, he said. Then the world faded to black, and he knew nothing more. When he woke 3 days later, aboard the Horizon, he learned that he had become a legend, the human soldier who had stood alone against an empire, the man who had refused to fall. But Daniel did not feel like a legend. He was just a soldier from Nebraska who had done what he believed was right, and sometimes that was enough to change the galaxy. 3 days passed and the humans heard nothing from the queen. They were kept in their quarters like prisoners. Servants brought them food and water, but no one would speak to them. Guards stood outside their doors at all times. When they asked questions, they received only silence. Commander Harris tried to stay positive. These things take time. He told the team, the Zengai have ruled for 40,000 years. To them 3 days is nothing. But Daniel could see the worry in his eyes. They all knew the truth. The Queen was not considering their proposal. She was simply waiting for them to give up and leave. On the 4th night, Daniel could not sleep. The bed was comfortable enough, and the room was quiet, but his mind would not rest. He kept thinking about the throne room, about the laughter of the nobles, about the cold emptiness in the Queen's eyes. The palace grounds stretched out below him, bathed in the silver light of 3 moons. Gardens of strange flowers glowed softly in the darkness. Fountains of light danced without water. It was beautiful beyond words, and it was completely forbidden to him. Daniel made a decision, a stupid decision probably, but he had never been good at following rules when those rules made no sense. He opened his door quietly. The guards were standing at the end of the hallway, their backs turned. Daniel slipped out and moved in the opposite direction. Staying close to the shadows, he found a side passage that led outside. The night air was cool and sweet. He walked through the gardens, touching the strange flowers, listening to the soft music of alien insects. For the first time since arriving, he felt something other than fear and frustration. He felt wonder. The garden path led him to a place he had not seen before. It was hidden behind tall hedges of silver leaves, a small clearing with a pool of dark water at its center. The pool reflected the 3 moons perfectly, like a mirror showing another world. And then he heard the crying. It was soft, almost too quiet to notice, but Daniel had spent years rescuing people in trouble. He knew the sound of fear when he heard it. He followed the sound to a tall tree at the edge of the clearing. The tree had branches that twisted like frozen rivers, reaching up toward the stars, and there on one of the highest branches was a small figure, a child, a Zenai girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old by human standards. Her pale blue skin glowed faintly in the moonlight. Her silver eyes were wet with tears. She was holding on to the branch with both hands, too scared to move. Hey there, Daniel called up softly. Are you okay? She said something in her own language, too fast for Daniel's translator to catch. I don't understand, Daniel said, but I can see you're stuck. Can you climb down? The girl shook her head. More tears ran down her face. Daniel did not hesitate. He grabbed the lowest branch and started climbing. The tree was strange, with bark that felt like smooth glass, but he had climbed worse things in his life. He moved carefully, testing each branch before putting his weight on it. When he reached the girl, she pressed herself against the trunk, trembling. It's okay, Daniel said gently. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to help you get down. Is that okay? The girl looked at him for a long moment, then slowly she nodded. Daniel smiled. Good. Now I'm going to carry you on my back. Just hold on tight and don't let go. She wrapped her thin arms around his neck and held on with surprising strength. Daniel climbed down slowly, talking to her the whole way. He told her about birth, about the trees there that changed color in autumn. He told her about his dog back home, a big golden retriever named Buddy, who was scared of cats. He told her silly jokes that made no sense without context. By the time they reached the ground, the Girl had stopped crying, she was even smiling a little. "There we go, Daniel," said, setting her down gently. "Safe and sound now. Where are your parents? I should probably get you back before." The sound of running footsteps cut him off. Guards burst into the clearing from every direction. Their weapons were drawn and glowing. Their faces were twisted with anger and fear. "Step away from her," one of them shouted. "Step away now." Daniel raised his hands and took a step back. "Wait, I was just helping her. She was stuck in the tree." And a guard struck him across the face. Daniel fell to his knees, tasting blood. "Do not speak," the guard roared. "You have touched the princess. You will die for this." Princess. Daniel looked at the little girl, and suddenly everything made sense. The fine clothes, the confident way she had looked at him, the panic in the guard's eyes. He had just put his hands on the daughter of Queen Vara. The guards grabbed Daniel and forced him to his feet. They bound his hands behind his back with glowing chains that burned against his skin. He did not resist. There was no point. But then the girl, the princess, stepped forward. "Stop," she commanded. The guards froze. "He helped me," the princess said. Her voice was small, but it carried the echo of her mother's authority. "I was stuck and scared, and he helped me. He was kind to me." She walked up to Daniel and looked at him with those silver eyes. There was no fear in them now, only curiosity and something that looked almost like gratitude. "What is your name?" she asked. "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Carter." "Daniel," she repeated, testing the strange human sounds. "I am Lith." She turned to the guards. "Take him to my mother, but do not hurt him. He is my friend." The guards looked at each other in confusion, but they obeyed. As they led Daniel away, Lith walked beside him. She did not touch him again, but she stayed close. And when he looked down at her, she smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real, and somehow, despite everything, Daniel found himself smiling back. Queen Vithara received him in a private chamber. She sat in a chair of black crystal, her silver eyes cold as winter stars. High Counselor Dref stood beside her, practically trembling with rage. "You touched my daughter," the queen said. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room like thunder. "She was stuck in a tree," Daniel said. "She was scared and crying. I helped her down, that's all. You should have called for guards." There were no guards, and she was scared now. Not later. The queen studied him for a long moment. Daniel waited for the order that would end his life. Instead, she spoke again. "You will stay away from my daughter. You will not speak to her. You will not look at her. If you disobey me, you will learn what happens to those who threaten my family." She waved her hand in dismissal as the guards led him away. Daniel paused at the door. "Your Majesty," he said. The queen's eyes narrowed. "You dare speak to me?" "I'm not sorry," Daniel said quietly. "I would do it again. Any decent person would." He walked out before she could respond. Behind him, in the silence of the chamber, Queen Vara sat very still. Her expression did not change, but something shifted in the depths of her silver eyes, something she had not felt in a very long time. Curiosity. A week passed after the incident in the garden. The diplomatic mission continued to wait, and Daniel continued to be ignored, but things had changed. The guards no longer looked at him with pure hatred. Now there was something else in their eyes, confusion perhaps, or grudging respect. Word had spread through the palace about the human who had helped the princess. Some thought he was foolish, others thought he was brave. None of them understood him. Princess Lith understood even less. Despite her mother's orders, she found ways to see Daniel. She would appear at the end of hallways, watching him with those curious silver eyes. She would wave at him from distant balconies. Once, she left a small gift outside his door, a crystal flower that glowed with soft blue light. Daniel kept the flower on his windowsill. It reminded him that not everyone in this palace saw humans as insects to be crushed. You need to be careful, he told Daniel one morning. The queen gave you a direct order. If she thinks you're encouraging this, I'm not encouraging anything, Daniel said. She's just a kid, a lonely kid who doesn't have many friends. She's the heir to the Zenkai Empire. Every move she makes has meaning. Daniel shook his head. Maybe to them, but to me she's just a little girl who got stuck in a tree. Harris sighed. You're going to get us all killed. He was joking. Mostly. 3 days later the storm came. It began as a distant rumble on the horizon. Dark clouds gathered over the mountains, flashing with purple lightning. The Zenkai called it a Vexar storm, violent weather event that struck the planet every few years. The winds could tear apart buildings. The lightning could melt stone. The palace was safe. Its shields could withstand almost anything, but not everyone was in the palace. Daniel was in the human quarters. When Katie came running in, there's been an accident, she said, her face pale. A transport ship crashed in the northern mountains. Survivors are trapped in the wreckage. Daniel felt his heart beat faster. How many? 37, mostly medical staff and scientists. They were delivering supplies to a remote research station. And the rescue? Katie shook her head. The Zenkai military is mobilizing, but the storm is too strong. Their ships can't fly in those conditions. They're saying it could be 6 or 7 hours before they can reach the crash site. Daniel stood up. The survivors don't have 6 or 7 hours, not in a storm like that. I know, but there's nothing anyone can do. Daniel was already walking toward the door. Where's the shuttle we came in? The human shuttle. Katie grabbed his arm. That shuttle isn't designed for this kind of weather. You'll die out there, maybe, but they'll definitely die if no one goes. He pulled free and kept walking. Commander Harris met him in the hangar. The human shuttle sat in the corner, small and fragile looking compared to the massive Zenkai vessels. Rain was already pounding against the hangar doors. I can't let you do this, Harris said. You can't stop me either. This could destroy everything we've worked for. If you crash that shuttle, if you die out there, the Zenkai will see it as another example of human recklessness. Daniel turned to face him. There are 37 people trapped in a mountain right now. They're cold and scared and hurt, and they're going to die unless someone helps them. I don't care what the Zenkai think of me. I don't care about the mission. Those people need help and I can help them. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. Emergency beacon, he said, pressing it into Daniel's hand. If you get in trouble, activate this. We'll find a way to reach you. Daniel nodded. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, just don't die. Daniel climbed into the shuttle and fired up the engines. The hangar doors opened, revealing a wall of rain and wind. Lightning split the sky like broken glass. He flew into the storm. The first hour was the worst. The winds grabbed the shuttle and threw it around like a toy. Rain hammered against the hull so hard that Daniel could barely see. The instruments flickered and screamed warnings. Twice he lost control completely and had to fight to keep the shuttle from spinning into the mountains, but Daniel had flown through hurricanes on Earth. He had navigated through blizzards that would have killed any other pilot. He knew how to read the wind, how to find the calm spaces between the chaos. He kept flying. Crash site appeared on his sensors 2 hours later. The transport ship had come down on a rocky plateau, breaking apart. On impact, pieces of wreckage were scattered across the mountainside. Some of them were still on fire despite the rain. Daniel landed the shuttle as close as he could get. The wind nearly tore the door off when he opened it. He stepped out into the storm rain, slashing at his face like tiny knives. The survivors had gathered in the largest piece of wreckage. They were huddled together for warmth, some of them injured, all of them terrified. Their silver eyes went wide when they saw Daniel, a human of all things, walking out of the storm. Is anyone badly hurt? Daniel shouted over the wind. One of the Zengai pointed to a corner of the wreckage. The princess. Daniel's blood went cold. Princess. He pushed through the crowd and found her. Lith was lying on a makeshift bed of torn fabric and broken metal. Her arm was bent at a wrong angle. Her face was pale and her breathing was shallow, but she was alive. Daniel, she whispered when she saw him. You came, of course. I came. He knelt beside her and took her uninjured hand. What were you doing on this ship? I wanted to see the research station. Mother said no, but she trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. I was stupid. Hey, no, you're not stupid. You're brave. Stupid people don't survive crashes like this. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm going to get you out of here, all of you, but I need you to be strong for a little while longer. Can you do that? Lith nodded. Daniel organized the survivors quickly. He had done this 100 times before. He assigned the healthy ones to help the injured. He created a system for moving people to the shuttle. He kept everyone calm with steady words and confident smiles. Even though his heart was racing, the shuttle could not carry everyone at once. It took 3 trips through the storm, each one more dangerous than the last. The wind was getting stronger. The lightning was striking closer. The shuttle's engines were starting to fail, but Daniel kept flying. On the final trip, he carried Lith in his arms. She was too weak to walk, so he held her close to keep her warm. She buried her face in his chest, and he told her stories to keep her mind off the pain. He told her about the ocean, how it stretched forever in every direction, blue and green and gray. He told her about the sound of waves and the smell of salt. He told her about building sand castles on the beach only to watch them wash away. Will you take me there someday? Lith asked. To the ocean? Sure, Daniel said, if your mother doesn't have me executed first. Lith laughed. It was a weak sound, but it was real. The Singai rescue ships arrived just as Daniel landed at the palace. Medical teams rushed forward to take the survivors. Soldiers stared at Daniel with expressions he could not read. One of them approached him, a tall officer with medals on his chest. You flew through that storm? The officer asked. Yes, Daniel replied. In that tiny ship? Yes. The officer was silent for a moment, then he placed his hand over his heart, a Zenkai gesture of respect. The Queen will want to see you, he said. Daniel nodded. He expected nothing good, but as he watched the medical team carry Lith away, she turned her head and looked at him. She was crying, but she was also smiling. "Thank you," she mouthed. Daniel smiled back. Whatever came next, it had been worth it. Daniel slept for 14 hours. After the rescue, his body was exhausted. The flight through the storm had pushed him to his absolute limits. His muscles ached, his hands were still shaking. When he finally woke up, the light of 2 suns was streaming through his window. Katie was waiting for him with food and water. "You're famous now," she said, setting the tray beside his bed. "The whole palace is talking about you, the human who flew through a Vexar storm. Some of them think you're insane. Others think you're some kind of hero." Daniel sat up slowly, his body protesting every movement. "What about the Queen?" Katie's expression darkened. "She hasn't said anything, but there's going to be a formal assembly today. All the nobles, all the military commanders, the whole court, and we're invited. We're required to attend." Katie paused. "Daniel, I don't know what's going to happen. You saved her daughter, but you also disobeyed her direct orders. You got close to Lith again. In Zengai culture, that's a serious offense. I know they could execute you. I know." Katie stared at him. "And you're just okay with that?" Daniel thought about it. For a moment, he thought about Lith's face when he found her in the wreckage. He thought about the way she had held on to him during the flight back. He thought about her question, whether he would take her to see the ocean. "I did the right thing," he said finally. "Whatever happens next, I can live with that." Katie shook her head. "You're the strangest person I've ever met." "I get that a lot." The assembly was scheduled for midday. Daniel put on his cleanest uniform and tried to make himself look presentable. The bruise on his face from when the guard had struck him was still visible, but there was nothing he could do about that. Commander Harris came to collect him personally. "How are you feeling?" Harris asked as they walked through the palace corridors. "Like I flew a shuttle through a hurricane." Harris almost smiled. "Listen, Daniel, whatever happens in there, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. What you did was reckless and dangerous and probably stupid, but it was also the most human thing I've ever seen." Daniel looked at him. "That's either a compliment or an insult." "It's both." The throne room was even more crowded than the first time Daniel had seen it. Thousands of Zenkai filled the space. Nobles in their shimmering robes, soldiers in their gleaming armor, advisors and priests and officials of every kind. They all stood in perfect rows, their silver eyes fixed on the throne at the far end of the room. Queen Vithura sat upon her crystal throne, her face as cold and unreadable as a statue. High Counselor Dreth stood at her side, looking like he had swallowed something bitter. The human delegation was led to a spot near the front of the room. Daniel stood with his team, feeling the weight of 10,000 eyes upon him. The silence was crushing. For a long moment, nothing happened. The Queen simply sat on her throne, staring at some point in the distance. The tension grew thicker with every passing second. Then the doors at the back of the throne room opened. A small figure appeared in the doorway. Lith. She was dressed in a gown of pure white, her pale blue skin glowing softly in the light. Her arm was wrapped in a bandage, and she moved carefully, still weak from her injuries. But her silver eyes were bright and clear. She began to walk down the center of the throne room. The nobles watched her in silence. The soldiers stood at attention. Even High Counselor Dreth seemed frozen, his eyes wide with something that looked like fear. Lith walked slowly, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. She seemed to be looking for something or someone, and then she found him. Her eyes locked onto Daniel. For a single heartbeat, everything stopped. And then Lith ran. The entire palace went silent, not the normal silence of a formal assembly. This was something deeper, something more profound. It was the silence of shock, of disbelief, of a moment that no one had ever expected to see. Lith ran across the throne room, her white gown flowing behind her. She ran past the nobles, past the soldiers, past High Counselor Dreth and his frozen expression of horror. She ran straight to Daniel Carter, and she threw her arms around him. The silence stretched on forever. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat, loud as thunder in his ears. He could feel Lith's small arms wrapped around his waist, holding him tightly. She pressed her face against his chest and whispered a single word in her own language. The translator rendered it a moment later, but the meaning was clear from her voice alone. Family in Zinca culture, a public embrace from royalty, was the highest honor that could be given to anyone. It was a declaration of trust, of love, of unbreakable bond. It was never given lightly. It was never given to outsiders. It had never in the entire history of the Zankai Empire been given to a human until now. Daniel did not know what to do. He stood perfectly still, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. He could feel the eyes of 10,000 Zenkai upon him, judging him, evaluating him. Slowly, carefully, he placed his hand on Lai's head. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm here." The silence continued. Nobles stared. The soldiers watched. High Counselor Dreth looked like he was about to explode. And then Queen Vithara rose from her throne. She descended the steps slowly, her gown trailing behind her like river of darkness. Her silver eyes were fixed on Daniel and her daughter. Her expression was impossible to read. Crowd parted before her like water before a ship. She walked through them without acknowledgement, her attention focused entirely on the human he held. Her child. She stopped 3 paces away. For a long moment, mother and daughter and strangers stood in silence. Entire court held its breath. Then Vithara spoke. "You disobeyed my orders." "Yes, Your Majesty." "I told you to stay away from my daughter." "Yes, Your Majesty." "And yet, here you stand in my throne room with her arms around you." Daniel said nothing. There was nothing to say. Vithara studied him with those ancient silver eyes. Behind her, High Counselor Dreth stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "This human has committed grave offenses against the crown. He has ignored your direct commands. He has dared to touch the princess not once but twice. He must be punished. He must be made an example." Several nobles murmured in agreement. But Vithara did not look at Dreth. She did not look at the nobles. She continued to stare at Daniel. "Tell me," she said quietly, "when you flew into that storm, when you risked your life to save those survivors, did you know my daughter was among them?" "No, Your Majesty." "Then why did you go?" Daniel thought about the question. He thought about all the complicated reasons he could give. Duty, honor, the mission, humanity's reputation. But in the end, there was only one truth. Because they needed help, he said simply, "and I could help them." The queen was silent for a very long time. Then she looked down at her daughter still clinging to Daniel and LT Unk and GT's waist. Lith looked back at her mother with defiant silver eyes. Leith, the queen said, "Do you understand what you have done, the embrace you have given this human carries great meaning. It cannot be taken back, I know, mother." Lith said, "I wanted to do it, he saved all of us, he came when no one else would, he held me when I was scared, he told me stories to make me feel better." She looked up at Daniel. "He is my friend, my family, and I don't care if he's human." The queen closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had changed. The coldness was still there, but beneath it Daniel saw something else, something that looked almost like respect. "We will speak more of this tomorrow," the said. "For now the assembly is concluded." She turned and walked back toward her throne. The crowd parted before her once again, but at the base of the steps she paused and looked back at Daniel. "Do not think this changes anything, human," she said. "I have not made my decision about your species." She ascended to her throne. But as Daniel watched her go, he noticed something he had not seen before. Smallest trace of a smile on her lips. The night after the assembly, Daniel could not sleep again, but this time it was not worry that kept him awake. It was something he could not quite name. Feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing if he would fall or fly. He sat by his window watching the three moons trace their slow paths across the alien sky. The crystal flower Lith had given him glowed softly on the windowsill, its light pulsing like a tiny heartbeat. A knock came at his door. When he opened it, he found a palace servant standing outside. The servant bowed deeply, something that had never happened before. "The queen requests your presence," the servant said, alone. Daniel followed the servant through the silent palace. The corridors were empty at this hour, lit only by the soft glow of floating lights. Their footsteps echoed on the marble floors like distant drums. They arrived at a chamber Daniel had never seen before. It was smaller than the throne room, more intimate. The walls were lined with books and artifacts from 1,000 different worlds. A fire burned in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the ceiling. Queen Vara stood by the fire, her back to the door. She had removed her crown and her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders. She looked almost ordinary, almost human. "Leave us," she said to the servant. The door closed behind Daniel. He stood in silence, waiting. For a long moment, Vithara did not speak. She stared into the flames, her reflection flickering in the polished stone walls. "Do you know how old I am, Daniel Carter?" she asked finally. "No, Your Majesty. I have lived for 3,000 years. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched stars die. I have held the fate of trillions in my hands." She turned to face him. "In all that time I have learned to trust nothing that I cannot understand, and I do not understand you." Daniel said nothing. "When you first arrived, I saw what I expected to see. Another young species full of ambition and violence and short-lived dreams. I have seen your kind before. I know how your story usually ends." She walked toward him slowly. "But you are not what I expected. When my daughter was stuck in that tree, you did not call for help. You did not hesitate. You simply acted. When the transport crashed, you flew into certain death without a moment of doubt." She stopped in front of him, her silver eyes searching his face. "Why?" she asked. "You owed nothing to my people. You owed nothing to my daughter. We treated you with contempt and suspicion. And yet you risked everything for us. Why? Daniel thought about the question. He thought about all the times he had been asked similar questions back on Earth. Why did you run into that burning building? Why did you dive into that frozen lake? Why did you fly into that hurricane? The answer was always the same, because someone needed help, he said, and I could help them. The Thor shook her head. Slowly, that is not an answer, that is an instinct and impulse. In my experience, impulses are dangerous things. They lead to reckless behavior and early death, maybe, Daniel admitted. But they also lead to connection, to trust, to love. He met her gaze. Your Majesty, I know my species is young. I know we've made mistakes, but we're not just violence and ambition. We're also kindness and courage and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. He took a breath. When I found Lith in that wreckage, I didn't see an alien princess. I saw a scared little girl who needed someone to tell her everything would be okay. I would have done the same for any child anywhere in the galaxy. That's humanity. The Queen was silent for a very long time. Then she did something Daniel had never expected. She smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible the firelight, but it transformed her face completely. For just a moment she was not a 3,000-year-old monarch with the weight of an empire on her shoulders. She was simply a mother, grateful that her daughter was alive. My advisors think I should reject your proposal, she said. They say humans cannot be trusted. They say you will betray us eventually, as all young species do. And what do you think? Thera walked to a table near the fire. On it sat a crystal decanter filled with golden liquid. She poured 2 glasses and handed one to Daniel. I think, she said slowly, that I have spent 3,000 years judging species by their technology, their military strength, their strategic value. I have never considered judging them by their hearts. She raised her glass. Perhaps it is time. I learned. The next morning the entire court assembled once again, but this time the atmosphere was different. There was still tension in the air, still suspicion in the eyes of many nobles, but there was also something else, something that felt almost like anticipation. Daniel stood with his team near the front of the throne room. Lith had insisted on standing beside him, her small hand clasped in his. High Counselor Dreth watched them with barely concealed fury, but he said nothing. Queen Vitha entered the throne room in full ceremonial dress. Her crown of living light floated above her head, casting rainbows across the walls. She ascended to her throne and looked out at her people. My subjects, she began, we stand at a turning point in the history of our empire. For 40,000 years we have been the guardians of this galaxy. We have maintained peace and order among the stars. We have judged which species are worthy of joining the civilized races and which are not. She paused. Today I make such a judgment. Throne room went silent. The humans came to us as strangers asking for alliance. My first instinct was to reject them. They are young, they are emotional, they have a history of violence that makes even the oldest among us uncomfortable. Daniel felt his heart pounding in his chest. But I have learned something in these past weeks, Bethara continued. I have learned that youth is not always a weakness. I have learned that emotion can be a strength, not a flaw. And I have learned that the measure of a species is not found in their technology or their age, but in the character of Their people she looked directly at. Daniel, this human, risked his life for strangers who had shown him nothing but contempt. He flew into impossible danger, not for glory or reward, but simply because people needed help. When he found my daughter injured and afraid, he held her in his arms and told her stories to ease her pain. Her voice softened. That is not the behavior of a primitive species. That is the behavior of a noble heart. She rose from her throne, therefore by my authority as Queen of the Zinc Empire, I hereby declare humanity to be a worthy species. Earth and all its people are granted full alliance with our empire, not as subjects but as equals. Let no one in my realm treat them with disrespect, for they have earned their place among the stars. Throne room erupted in noise. Some nobles cheered, others protested. High Counselor Dreth looked like he was going to faint, but Vitha paid them no attention. She descended from her throne and walked toward Daniel. The crowd parted before her. She stopped in front of him and looked into his eyes. You asked me once if you could take my daughter to see the ocean, she said. I believe I never gave you an answer. Daniel blinked in surprise. Your Majesty, he said. Vithara smiled. When diplomatic relations are established, I expect you will return to Earth. When you do, I would like Lith to accompany you. She has never seen another world. I think it is time she learned that there is wonder beyond our borders. Lyrit's eyes went wide. Really, Mother, I can go to Earth if Daniel is willing to show you, Vithara replied. Daniel looked down at Lith, at her bright silver eyes and hopeful smile. Then he looked at the Queen, at the warmth that had finally broken through her ancient coldness. It would be my honor, he said. Lith threw her arms around him again. The court fell silent once more, but this time the silence was different. This time it was filled with wonder instead of shock. Queen Bethro watched them for a moment. Then she reached out and placed her hand on Daniel's shoulder. Thank you, she said quietly, for showing me that I still have things to learn. Daniel met her gaze. Thank you for being willing to learn them. As he stood in the throne room of the most powerful empire in the galaxy, with a princess in his arms and a queen's hand on his shoulder, Daniel Carter finally understood something important. Humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology. It had never been their ambition or their intelligence or their ability to adapt. It was something much simpler. Humans cared. They cared about strangers and enemies and people they had never met. They cared about children stuck in trees and survivors trapped in storms. They cared with a fierce, stubborn, irrational passion that made no logical sense, and sometimes against all odds. That caring was enough to change everything. The first human ship landed on Earth 3 months later, carrying an ambassador from the Zenkai Empire. Princess Lith stepped onto the surface of the blue planet and looked up at the sky with wonder in her silver eyes. Daniel stood beside her, watching her take in the sight of his home world. What do you think? He asked. Lith smiled. It's beautiful, but I want to see the ocean. Daniel laughed and took her hand. Then let's go, he said.